Shavua Tov and Shana Tova. Third time is the charm. Excellent, excellent. When I was in university, one of the perks of my particular college was that they made it very easy to study abroad. Being a coward when it came to foreign languages, it meant that I wanted to study abroad in an English-speaking country. Excuse me while I just sort this out. So I picked England. And no, this is not where I met my British wife, Penelope. I had to wait until I went to Japan a decade later, but it still got me familiar with British culture and to enjoy a great education there in London. But one of the best parts of the education was getting to meet the other students, who, of course, shared very different upbringings and very different styles. And the dorm that I was staying in also was, of course, one that had many international students. But it was one British student in particular on my first day of arriving, when I was jet-lagged and therefore vulnerable to these types of conversations, who decided that he would missionize me. When he found out that I was Jewish, he decided that he would share his views on all things God and bring me over the line into Christianity. It didn't work, spoiler alert. Hopefully you were able to figure that out from context. But his argument was one that I had not heard up to that point. I was just 20 at the time. His argument was that Judaism was a doomed religion from its inception. Follow the logic, such as it is. Have you ever read that book? Have you ever read all of the rules? Those were God deliberately putting traps in front of the Jewish people. God was laying bear traps with all those commandments because who could possibly do them? Now, why would God want to lay a trap in front of the people? To maximize the guilt that they would then need to have cleansed through the blood sacrifice of Jesus. You see, God got us in debt, and that way he could foreclose on us and take us with Christianity. I scratched my head because this was a novel argument that I had not been privy to before. I was used to the idea of supersessionist theology, that God had scrapped the idea of the Jewish Bible. I was used to the idea that we just weren't able to live up to the commandments, but God at least gave us the attempt, and then when we failed, he said, okay, it's okay, I'll just do it for you. But the idea that God would deliberately create the commandments as an impossible goal only to maximize our sinfulness that he could then capitalize upon through the redemption of Jesus, etc., was very shocking. But there was one part of his discussion that actually did change my mind. Because he asked me, have you ever read that book? And up to that point, yes, I had gone to services. My mother will attest to that. And I read along with the Torah reading. But as a philosophy student and political science student, I had never sat down to read the Torah, let alone the rest of the Tanakh, as a book. It was something that you just read, more or less mechanically, maybe with a little bit of reflection here and there. But, I was young, stupid. It didn't do much more than that. I had certainly spent many more hours of intellectual effort on trying to master my coursework than I ever had trying to master my Judaism. So I went out to a bookstore while I was in England, and I bought a copy. Remember, this is before the internet. I couldn't just look it up on my phone. And I bought a copy of the Tanakh, of the Bible. Then I went to Israel a few months later. And eventually I ended up becoming a rabbi. So, despite the audacity of his question, it is part of how I ended up becoming a rabbi. Because to have someone ask me to justify my faith kicked me in the keister, and I decided I actually should probably know something to be able to do it. But the underlying question that he had of the logic of the commandments and commandedness, the logic of redemption, of righteousness and sinfulness, of whether or not humans are capable of following the commandments, this is something that I think many people continue to struggle with, whether they realize it or not. Because many of us have serious doubts about our own abilities, and we have even more serious doubts about the ability of the other people. Even if I might be able to do things, am I sure my neighbor can? But what is it you are trying to do? Do you know all the commandments? I'm not seeing a lot of hands. Certainly not 613 hands. So this is where our tradition comes to the rescue. Because our tradition says, most famously in the words of Rav Sadia Gaon, the great teacher of the last half of the first millennia, he says, all of the commandments are contained in those. All 613 are right there. It's an easy cheat sheet. If you ever forget a commandment, all you have to do is go and look. What am I pointing at for those who are playing at home and can't see? The 10 Commandments, right, with the misspelling. The 10 Commandments on the wall have all of the commandments embedded within them. All you need is one of these to unpack those, and you can get all 613. Sounds a little far-fetched, doesn't it? Maybe. Okay, so let's try a few very simple ones. Don't steal. One of the famous 10 Commandments. From that, you could deduce what happens when you find lost property. You return it. Why? It's not yours, which meant if you kept it, it would be stealing. Absolutely right. Don't murder, which means if somebody is antagonizing you and you want to pull back and punch them, you don't. Why? Well, if murder is not allowed, then taking the steps that lead to a person's death and injury are also not allowed. You see how this works? Very simple. And when you have an animal that has been slaughtered and its blood is poured out upon the ground and you cover it over with dirt, that's from okay, so this is where it gets a little bit harder. When it says that if you have damaged someone else's ox, that you need to pay reparations for it. This is stealing again. Okay, that one's an easy one again. But kosher slaughter? I don't really see that on the list. So this is where you have to actually use your head. According to Rav Sadia Gaon, it comes under the heading of do not covet. And that helps a little bit. All right, let's just do a quick check here, because, you see, to understand Torah, and to understand the 10 Commandments, and to understand the 613 Commandments, and to understand life, you need to actually use that gift that God gave us, the thing I keep pointing to. Imagine you are a waiter at a restaurant, and 3 annoying college kids come in. They're annoying because they decide they want to test you a little bit, and they say, look, we're going to give you a little bit of information, and you're going to fill our order. All right, there are 3 of us. This is Alice, John, and Frank. And we'd like some of that Neapolitan ice cream you've got in the back, but each of us only likes one flavor. Alice says, one of the others likes chocolate. John says, I like vanilla. Now, go fill the order. What was that? So Frank likes chocolate, because we knew that John liked vanilla, and Alice said one of the others likes chocolate, so therefore it could only be John or Frank who likes the chocolate and the Neapolitan, and since John has already declared his love of vanilla, it must be Frank who's the chocolate fiend, which means Alice likes strawberry. See how smart you are? You only needed 2 pieces of information to be given from them, and an understanding and awareness of the context, that Neapolitan has these 3 particular flavors, and that there are 3 people who are talking to you, etc. But 2 pieces of information, and you could actually figure out 3 things. This is the way logic works. One of the requirements, says our tradition, for becoming a rabbi is being able to figure out one thing from other things. Now that may sound like, well, yeah. But think of what Judaism is setting as being how we are supposed to learn. You are not simply supposed to memorize the Torah. You are not simply supposed to memorize the 10 Commandments or the 613 Commandments or the 1,000 of additional rules and principles that the rabbis laid out for us. You are supposed to understand them. And in fact, you are supposed to understand them so well, says Rav Saadia Gaon, that you could deduce the existence of 603 of them from only 10. Now, most of us do not have Rav Saadia Gaon's ability. He was, after all, a Gaon. A word that now modern day usage means genius. But at the time, it was more of an official title. But he certainly was the top of the meritocracy of the ancient Talmudic world. So what are we very grateful for? That he wrote it down. That he shared it with us. And that not only did he share his ideas, but so did the other commentators. And so did they share down their arguments and their disputes. And most importantly, as your teacher always told you when you were in school, they showed their work. Right? They laid out the questions and answers, the back and the forth, so that we wouldn't just be given an answer key, but we would be given the worksheet laid out in detail, not so that we could memorize it as well, but so that we could learn to make our minds do the same thing when we had questions of our own. But all of this is predicated back to that question that the evangelizer asked me way back in England. Have you read this book? Have you? Have you read it and thought about it? Have you analyzed one piece against another? Did you see the reading today and say, that's an interesting story? Or did you see the reading today and say, you know what, I got some questions about this? Or, this doesn't seem to match when God tells us not to sacrifice our children. Or perhaps this was a special case. Or perhaps this was a test. That is thinking Jewishly. But living Jewishly is more than just asking the questions to yourself, or even whispering them to the person you're sitting next to, or saying a bit louder if they're 6 feet away from you. Asking the question is the start. Doing the work to find the answer is what comes next. When you're not sitting here in shul, which admittedly recently has become much more infrequent for everyone, do you read Jewish books? Do you read Jewish commentary? Do you read different analyses? Do you engage in conversation with other people, Jews or non-Jews, about what this thing means and how it matters in our life? Do you have a Jewish library either at home or in your pocket on your cellular device? Not asking right now, but in general. The answer to all of that should be yes, because it has never been easier to engage in Jewish learning than it is now. You may think the people of the ancient world were lucky because God was feeding them manna and giving them a well and they didn't have a job. But hey, they were still walking through the Sinai wilderness and they still had to learn everything orally because they did not have libraries in each and every one of their sukkot. We are blessed with cheap publishing, and we are blessed with free dissemination of Jewish ideas through the internet. Whether it is a beautiful website like Sefaria, which I continually promote. You might think I have stock, but it's a nonprofit organization, so I don't. Or whether it is through places like My Jewish Learning, or whether it is through YouTube, one of the best Jewish repositories of learning ever, although there is also lots of drech. Double check with me if you find something that sounds too bad. There is no excuse for not knowing more tomorrow than you know today. There is no justification. Because if you don't, then you are making that missionary right. Think about that for a second. If you have decided that it is too hard to learn Judaism, then you are telling him you know what, you're right. God gave us something that was impossible, or at least impossible for me. So I'm giving up. I'm not going to stop calling myself a Jew, and thank God you don't, and bless you. But I'm not really going to be able to go further than this. God made a mistake. God didn't realize how incapable I was going to be. Or God did it deliberately, either of which are wrong. Or perhaps you don't study because you think you don't need to study. Hey, I already know this. I already know how to be a Jew. I've been a Jew my whole life. What else do I need to do? Everything I need to do I've already been exposed to. My Hebrew school teachers taught me, maybe my high school program taught me. I've lived a Jewish life. I've listened to every sermon the rabbi's given. I don't have to do anything else. This is surely enough. Really? Our greatest sages studied until the day they could no longer see, and even then would continue purely orally until they could no longer live, and they did not believe they understood everything. They did not believe they were ever done. Are you telling me that you understand the mysteries of our faith more than the greatest rabbis who have ever lived? If so, please publish your own book and share them with the rest of us, because you can go down as one of the greats. No, I think the main reason that most people don't study is because they believe that there are too many other things they need to do. And they believe that the benefit that will come from an honest study of the text will either be so tangential to life as to not be worth the time, or be so difficult to achieve that they will feel inadequate during the search. Not that they think it's impossible, but just that it's hard. The same way that someone may decide that they want to be able to run a marathon, but after the first mile of working at it, they realize in breathless panting and stitches in their side that this is going to be a lot harder to achieve than they thought. So what do? They stop. Does that mean the marathon is impossible? Does that mean the benefit that the marathon training might give you is unnecessary? That it is not worthwhile? Well, doctors may disagree on that, but I can tell you that when it comes to the Torah, yes, it's going to be hard to start. And yes, the progress is going to feel a little slow. And yes, you may not see the results immediately. Welcome to a world of delayed gratification. Welcome to a world where you invest now for something that will benefit you next month, next year. Welcome to something where when you invest in it, you are not going to see an immediate transformation of your life. Judaism, despite what some people on YouTube says, does not sell quick solutions for your life's problems. It does not bottle up happiness and say all you have to do is read this verse 10 times. All you have to do is wear this red thread. Those people who sell you that are selling something, and it ain't Judaism. Real Judaism is nose down in the text and arguing with each other about what it means, and having the humility to know that you don't know everything, and having just enough arrogance to believe that you will. And that drives us forward. You have more opportunities now than ever before, than any generation before. You have fewer excuses not to engage now than any generation before. And you have more to gain than ever before, because we as Jews live in a privileged position in history to allow our Judaism to flower and express itself in the world without limitations that our ancestors had to face. Why hold yourself back? I'm not saying that you have to show up to any of my classes. I am not so prideful to say that only enrolling in my classes means you are studying. But whatever amount of serious Jewish engagement you are making, whether it be directly with the Torah, with the Mishnah, with the Talmud, with the Midrash, whether it be with Halakha, whether it be with Kabbalah, or whether it be with Jewish history and Jewish culture and art, which express through themselves micro snapshots of the different ways and modes of living our people have engaged in that are derived from all of our classical texts. Increase what you are doing. You can know more and then you can be more. Do not allow yourself to be fooled into thinking that somehow God has set a bar too high for you. Do not allow yourself to be tricked into thinking that God made this impossible. God made you and God made Torah, and the two were made to go together. And nothing can keep them apart except you. Shavua Tov and Shana Tova.